There are some trees that look nothing like anything you've seen before, from the oldest trees on the planet to trees that bleed and massive trees that look alien. Today, I'm counting down the top 15 most unbelievably cool trees ever found. Number 15. The Tibetan Cherry Tree. While Tibet is known for its incredible mountains, what perhaps doesn't get enough coverage are its fantastic forests. One species within them is the Tibetan cherry tree. Now, while its leaves are not all that colorful, it more than makes up for this with its incredible bark. More specifically, it's translucent reddish-brown, and when in the sun, it looks very similar to shined bronze or copper. This effect becomes magnified in late April when the trees temporarily bloom and the white flowers that contrast starkly with the darker bark of the tree show. Therefore, I think you'd agree, the Tibetan cherry tree is kind of a sight to behold. Number 14. The Jacarandas tree and its native range. It is probably for the best that they've been exported abroad. Number 13. The Rainbow Eucalyptus. Now, while the eucalyptus trees are famous for their association with Australian koala bears, the rainbow eucalyptus is not found on this island country. As the only eucalyptus tree that's indigenous to the northern hemisphere, it is native to the tropical forests of the Philippines, New Guinea, and Indonesia. While its maximum height of 75 meters is pretty impressive, its claim to fame is its striped, multicolored bark, which appears in streaks of pale green, red, orange, gray, and purplish brown. Beyond being pretty, this rainbow-colored tree is, ironically enough, often used to make white paper, thus making the rainbow eucalyptus both beautiful and economically productive. Number 12. The Ladysmith Rhododendron. Hailing from the town of Ladysmith on Canada's Vancouver Island, the Ladysmith rhododendron is technically a shrub, however, whether or not their efforts were successful. Number 11. The Deadfly Tree. While they may not bear leaves or fruit, deadfly trees look incredible in a very unique way. Coming from part of the Namib Desert known as the Deadfly, or Dead Marsh in English, the area was at one time very alive. After all, every 5 to 10 years, a river would divert water into the area, promoting the tree growth. However, 900 years ago, this all stopped when sand dunes cut off the river, causing all the trees in the marsh to dry up and die. However, because the area is so dry, the 900-year-old trees have not been able to rot, and as a result, they still sit as scorched black reminders of what used to be a lush forest. Number 10. The Joshua Tree. Named after the biblical figure Joshua by 19th century Mormon settlers, this species is found throughout the Mojave Desert in the southwestern United States. Now, why they got their name isn't exactly clear in height, making them the tallest plants in the Mojave Desert by a large margin. Joshua trees also stand apart for their somewhat zany yet beautiful appearance, as they've got fuzzy-looking bark with long branches that have little clusters of leaves at their end. And while this makes these trees look like something out of a Dr. Seuss book, it truly does look incredible. It's also worth mentioning that prior to the 20th century, Native Americans often used parts of the Joshua tree for food and fiber. More specifically, leaf fibers were occasionally used to bind and manufacture sandals, and root sheaths were often woven into baskets. In terms of the food, the Joshua tree's fruits were baked or boiled, then eaten, while seeds were ground into flour alongside the seeds of other plant species to create cakes. As such, the Joshua tree stands apart for being both resourceful and beautiful. Number 9. Cannonball Tree. Found in the tropical forests of Central and South America, the cannonball tree is a soft-wooded relative of the safe for humans to eat. The fruit's bad smell cause most to avoid it. In any case, it is because of this tree's beauty and form that many have been grown in front of Hindu temples. While not native to South Asia, many Hindus believe that the cannonball tree's hooded flowers look like the Naga, which are a race of half-serpent and half-human beings from Hindu theology. The tree also stands apart for non-religious or aesthetic reasons, as part of the plant has been used in traditional medicine to treat hypertension, tumors, pain, and inflammation, the common cold, stomach aches, skin conditions, and even malaria. And this tree may also have a future in the clothing industry. You see, the fruit and flowers are known to contain a specific chemical compound that have the same blue dye compounds that are found in the indigo plant, and studies seem to indicate that it could be used as a natural dye for fibers. So when you consider the species' medicinal, economic, and spiritual uses, it is fair to say that the cannonball tree can do it all. Number 8. The Manchineel Tree. Who eat them get a strange peppery feeling in their mouth. This slowly progresses to the point where you can't swallow solid food, and in time, you develop excruciating throat pain for hours on end. If you accidentally touch the tree's sap, things go from bad to worse. Not only is it extremely painful, but if it comes in contact with your skin or eyes, it can burn right through and cause permanent scarring and blindness. Beyond the fruit and the sap, injuries have also been reported by those who have inhaled smoke from its burned wood, touched parts of its trunk, or, believe it or not, have just stood close to one on a windy day. So it should come as no surprise that the mentioned tree holds the Guinness World Record for being the world's most dangerous tree. Yet I should assure you that if you're careful, you can likely avoid a brush with brutish injuries. This is just because in many areas, locals have begun to notice the dangers of these trees and have acted proactively by painting red X's or nailing warning signs to these trees in order to warn potential victims. Despite their toxicity, their wood is quite useful for the production of furniture. However, 725,000 kilograms of wood from a single tree. In fact, at 115 meters tall, a redwood named Hyperion is the world's tallest tree, making this species a true masterclass of a tree's growing potential. Now, if that wasn't cool enough, the species is also nearly immortal. They can live for up to 2,000 years without withering. This longevity, thanks to the tree's high amounts of tannins contained within the tree's bark. Now, these tannins help increase resistance to pests and diseases and help ward off insects like termites. However, despite the hardiness, they do rely on some pretty specific environmental conditions to remain in tip-top shape. More specifically, they thrive in the moderate coastal climates that have heavy and frequent fogs coming from the coast. Sometimes rainfall is generated by the redwoods themselves, as they can often create rain via a process where they trap fog and makes clouds within their branches. Yet while these conditions may be pretty specific, when everything is in line, they are by and large one of those. They're only about 40 meters tall. However, in time, they will eventually catch up with those on the American and Canadian West Coast. Additionally, despite being a foreign species, it appears that the redwood is ecologically benign, meaning that they're not disrupting the existing local ecosystem in any significant way. So it's fair to say that the presence of redwoods in England is generally a good thing. Number 6. Alerce millenario. In recent years, there's been some evidence to suggest that it's not Methuselah, but Alerce millenario that may just be the world's oldest tree. Located in the coastal mountains of Chile's Alerce Costero National Park, it is a massive tree, coming in at 60 meters tall and sporting a 4-meter wide trunk. Covered with moss and lichens, it's believed that this Patagonian cypress is mostly dead. According to Jonathan Barachevich of the Austral University of Chile, only 28% of the tree is actually alive, most of which is in the roots. It's the scientific method of dating tree rings to the exact year they were formed. According to Dr. Edward Cook of Columbia University, tree ring dating is the golden standard because the only way to truly determine the age of a tree is by this method, counting the rings, and that requires all rings to be present and accounted for. This means that an inability to do this puts any age record into question. In 2020, Barachevich and Lara decided to put their fears aside and core the tree with an increment borer. This is a T-shaped drill that scientists use to excise narrow cylinders of wood without really harming the tree, and after getting partway through, the plug of the wood yielded roughly 2,400 tightly spaced growth rings. However, this borer wasn't able to reach the tree's center, and as a result, Barachevich turned to statistical modeling to determine the full age. This method yielded an overall age estimate of 5,484 years old, with an 80% chance that the tree has lived for more than 5,000 years. If this is in fact true, you can see one of the most beautiful tree species on the planet. Known as the dragon's blood tree, it's not found anywhere else on planet Earth. It's known for its upturned, densely packed crown that looks pretty similar to an umbrella. These trees can live for upwards of 600 years, and while they look incredible, one of their most interesting features is the dark red resin. Better known as dragon's blood, this resin is famous for having an incredible medicinal property, as it's considered to be a cure-all for ailments such as fevers, cuts, diarrhea, ulcers, and dysentery. However, despite their beauty and utility, in recent years they've not been appreciated by local populations. This is because the island of Socotra is starting to create a large industrial and tourism sector. This has caused many of these trees to be chopped down in order to make way for new developments. And this has been made worse by the fact that the land these trees are on is often slow to regenerate, and as a result, increased cattle grazing across the island has made it difficult for young trees to take root. On a macro level, global warming has contributed to extreme. It is, for the time being, relatively safe, welcoming thousands of visitors at a time. However, at various times, it's been an epicenter for fighting. So, I would suggest following your country's travel advisories, and on my end, I wouldn't suggest visiting the island until the Yemeni civil war comes to an end. Number 4. Methuselah. So I mentioned Methuselah earlier, and while there are plenty of old trees on our planet, the one that does hold the title right now for being the world's oldest is the one and only Methuselah. Named after the biblical figure who supposedly lived for 969 years, this nickname is a bit of a misnomer. That's because this special tree actually outlived him. By all accounts, it's been kicking around for an astounding 4,854 years. For reference, this makes Methuselah far older than the ancient Romans and ancient Greeks, and even makes it older than the ancient Egyptian pyramids. This type of species is known as an extremophile. It means that it can withstand extremely cold temperatures, dry soils, high winds, and short growing seasons of other old trees in the area. While common wisdom suggests that a tree would grow better in a good climate with lots of shelter and access to nutrients, Methuselah lives in a harsh environment. The soil's patchy, winds are fierce, and the temperature's cold. Yet despite all this, it's perfectly adapted to this semi-arid boreal climate. Yet this still leaves us with an important question. How was Methuselah discovered? Well, the story goes that in 1957, two men by the name of Edmund Schulman and Tom Harland were conducting research in the area when they happened upon Methuselah. They then took samples and soon pinpointed its germination date to 2832 BC. While this was impressive, at that time, it wasn't the oldest bristlecone pine. That title belonged to Prometheus, who was about 59 years older than Methuselah. However, in mysterious circumstances, a graduate student accidentally cut Prometheus down in 1964, giving Methuselah the world record. Well, in any case, if you want to visit, you'll have to travel up into the White Shapes. The practice can trace its origins all the way back to the 7th century. It was during this time period that both Japanese and Chinese gardeners began to create what has become known as potted scenery, or penjing, using miniature trees. In the 12th century, Japanese craftspeople and monks created their own national form of tree art known as bonsai. While penjing often involves multiple trees in the creation of a scene, bonsai generally involves just one, and in all, it's become more well-known and popular of the two styles. Today, the world bonsai market has grown to a staggering $8.5 billion, and to date, the most expensive tree sold in 2017 for a whopping $1.3 million in a private sale. But it is possible to buy very cheap variations of the tree for about $20 in garden centers around the world, and the very best specimens, though, can fetch a pretty penny. It's also worth mentioning that in order to have a bonsai reach its maximum potential, it's got to be cared for in a very systematic way. First and foremost, you need to understand that the back, usually bonsai involves choosing one side so you have more control over the visual composition. So it should come as little surprise that certain bonsai growers have been at it for centuries, perfecting the craft and figuring out how to grow the most perfect bonsai. In fact, there are certain trees that have been a work in progress for hundreds of years, passing down from generation to generation. It's these specimens that are perfect examples of the intricacy and the beauty of bonsai craftsmanship, and that periodically they go for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. Number 2. Old Chico. While Old Chico may be small, it's pretty fierce. That's because this tiny 5-meter-tall tree is considered to be the oldest tree on the planet. First identified in Sweden in a national park in 2008, Old Chico is a Norway thin spruce that stands alone and isolated. While its current iteration is likely only a few hundred years old, Old Chico has a special talent, just learning how to plow fields, making its age absolutely incredible. It is worth mentioning that its makeup throws in a few wrenches in Old Chico's claim to be the oldest tree. First and foremost, it likely spent thousands of years as a shrub, only becoming a tree after the climate warmed enough for it to grow into the spindly tree we see. It's also worth mentioning that while anyone is free to visit Old Chico, we should warn you that at the moment it's not in the best of shape. That's because in February of 2023, a mountain guide who had visited the tree reported that an unusually heavy snow had broken off the top portion of the tree. While the damage has left the tree looking rather rough, it is good news that it will survive. While its upper stem may be damaged, the ancient root system underground is still intact and ready to reproduce a new stem when needed. Now, while it is technically possible to go there alone, park guides much prefer bringing people to the tree themselves for the sake of the environmental protection, and given its age, I'd say that those concerns are understandable. As a final note, it also appears that the tree has a new clone. On Golden, it's the genetic individual, not the tree on the mountain, that's nearly 10,000 years old, and a small clone is now planted in the hospital in Malmö is the same genetic individual. In that sense, it is the oldest spruce in the world at the very beginning of its life. Number 1. The aspen named Pando. So when it comes to age and size, Pando is easily one of the most impressive trees on the world. That's because its size makes it the single largest and heaviest organism on the planet. You see, while most trees are simply a trunk with roots, the aspen named Pando functions on an entirely different level. Rather than just have one set of roots, all of its roots are interconnected to create a giant organism consisting of over 40,000 individual trees. This colony of trees was first classified in 1976 by Jerry Kemperman and Burton Barnes. After some measurements in 1992, it was estimated that it comes in at about 6 million kilograms and spans across 43 hectares of land. Challenges such as drought, human development, grazing, and fire suppression, its life has been put in danger. Of these, one of the largest threats is, of all things, grazing. Ever since the 1980s, the area in and around Pando have been eaten up by mule deer, elk, and domestic cattle. In fact, in 2017, Paul C. Rogers of the Utah State University found that the Pando wasn't growing anymore, telling the New York Times that, quote, "If this were a community of humans, it would be as if a whole town of 47,000 had only 85-year-olds in it. Where is the next generation?" End quote. As such, the aspen Pando's health appears to be in serious decline. It is also worth mentioning that in 2024, work was done to figure out what the Pando sounds like. Initially, the work was done from an artistic standpoint. More specifically, sound artist Jeff Rice experimentally placed a hydrophone inside a hollow at the base of a branch and threaded it down to the tree's roots. He didn't expect to hear much. However, a faint sound was everything. After all, there is a reasonable possibility that the sound was actually traveling through the soil. Yet if further studies can prove that the root system facilitated the sound travel, this type of work could be of vast scientific importance. This is because this sound could reveal the inner workings of Pando's vast hidden hydraulic system in a non-destructive manner. This could in turn teach us way more about this incredible organism and be of use to the scientific community as a whole.